Greetings, little listeners and grown-up children, and welcome to our cozy corner of storytelling magic. As the day's last sunbeams fade and the first stars peek out, it's time to wrap ourselves in the warm blanket of a new tale. Take a moment to stretch your arms and legs, then let them rest easy. Feel the rhythm of your breath slowing, matching the peaceful pace of the night. Our story, The Quantum Quilt, is about to whisper its secrets to you, painting dreams in the canvas of your mind. Dr. Eliza Weaver stood in her grandmother's attic, surrounded by dusty boxes and forgotten memories. Her fingers trembled as she ran them across the intricate patterns of the old quilt spread before her. For years, she had dismissed her grandmother's tales as the ramblings of a woman lost in the fog of dementia. But now, as she traced the complex geometries stitched into the fabric, a chill ran down her spine. "When the stars align in the quilt, my dear," her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, "you can step through time itself." Eliza had always been a woman of science, a respected quantum physicist, with a reputation for pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But this was beyond anything she had ever encountered in her research. The quilt was a patchwork of colors and shapes, each section seemingly random, yet somehow harmonious when viewed as a whole. Blues faded into purples, circles intersected with squares, and throughout it all ran golden threads that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of the attic. Eliza's phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her from her reverie. It was a message from her lab partner, Dr. Marcus Chen. "Eliza, where are you? The particle accelerator results are in. You need to see this." She glanced back at the quilt, torn between her scientific curiosity and the pull of this family heirloom. With a sigh, she carefully folded the quilt and placed it in her bag. She would examine it more closely later. At the lab, Marcus was practically bouncing with excitement. "Eliza, you won't believe this. The results? They're impossible." He pulled up a series of graphs on the main screen, each showing wildly fluctuating energy readings. "We've detected particles that shouldn't exist. They're behaving as if they're moving backwards in time." Eliza's mind raced. Could it be connected to the quilt? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the data before her. "Show me everything," she said, slipping into her role as lead researcher. For hours, they pored over the results, theorizing and debating. It wasn't until the lab had emptied and the night janitor was making his rounds that Eliza remembered the quilt in her bag. "Marcus," she said hesitantly, "I need to show you something." She spread the quilt out on one of the lab tables, the golden threads catching the light from the computer screens. Marcus frowned, confused. "It's beautiful, Eliza, but what does this have to do with our research?" Eliza took a deep breath. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about this quilt," she said. "She said it could bend time." Marcus laughed, but the sound died in his throat as he looked closer at the patterns. "These geometries," he murmured, "they're reminiscent of some of our quantum field diagrams." They spent the next several hours analyzing the quilt, scanning it with every instrument at their disposal. The results were baffling. The golden threads seemed to be made of an unknown material, one that absorbed and reflected light in ways that defied the laws of physics. As the first rays of dawn crept through the lab windows, Eliza and Marcus sat back, exhausted and exhilarated. "We need to test it," Eliza said firmly. Marcus looked at her, alarm clear in his eyes. "Test it? Eliza, we don't even know what it is. This could be dangerous." "My grandmother used it," Eliza argued. "She traveled through time. If she could do it, so can we." After much debate, they agreed on a controlled experiment. They would attempt to send a small object, a lab mouse, through time, using the quilt as a focal point. They set up the equipment, calibrating their instruments to detect any temporal anomalies. The quilt was draped over a metal frame, with the mouse in a clear box placed at its center. "Ready?" Eliza asked, her finger hovering over the activation switch. Marcus nodded, his face pale but determined. Eliza pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the golden threads in the quilt began to glow, pulsing with an otherworldly light. The mouse in the box seemed to blur, its outline becoming indistinct. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the lab. Energy readings were off the charts. The quilt began to ripple, as if blown by an unseen wind. "Shut it down," Marcus yelled over the cacophony. Eliza lunged for the emergency stop, but before she could reach it, there was a blinding flash of light. When her vision cleared, she gasped in shock. The mouse was gone. In its place was a small, primitive-looking mammal, a distant ancestor of modern rodents that had gone extinct millions of years ago. "It worked," Eliza breathed. It actually worked. In the days that followed, Eliza and Marcus worked tirelessly to understand and control the quilt's power. They discovered that different patterns in the quilt corresponded to different points in time. By manipulating the fabric, they could, in theory, travel to any moment in history or the future. As news of their discoveries spread through the scientific community, Eliza found herself at the center of a moral and ethical storm. Many argued that time travel was too dangerous, that the potential for altering history was too great a risk. But Eliza couldn't let go of the possibilities. She thought of all the mysteries that could be solved, all the knowledge that could be gained. And more personally, she thought of her grandmother, of the chance to see her again, to understand the gift she had passed down. Late one night, after everyone else had left the lab, Eliza stood before the quilt. She had identified the pattern that she believed would take her back to her grandmother's time. Her hand hovered over the fabric, trembling slightly. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a familiar voice said from behind her. Eliza spun around, her heart pounding. There, looking exactly as she remembered, was her grandmother, but younger, in her prime. "Grandma?" Eliza whispered. The woman smiled, her eyes twinkling with the same mischief Eliza remembered from her childhood. "Hello, my dear. I've been waiting a long time for this moment." Eliza's mind reeled. But how? When? Her grandmother chuckled. "Time isn't as linear as we like to think, Eliza. I've come from your future, which is my past." "Confused yet?" Eliza nodded, unable to form words. "I know you have questions," her grandmother continued. "About the quilt, about time travel, about everything. But I'm here to warn you. The power you've discovered, it's more dangerous than you can imagine." She stepped forward, placing a hand on Eliza's arm. "History isn't just a series of events to be changed at will. It's a delicate tapestry, each thread connected to countless others. Pull one, and you risk unraveling everything." Eliza found her voice at last. "But the things we could learn, the people we could save." Her grandmother's eyes filled with sadness. "I know. Believe me, I know. I've seen wonders you can't imagine, and horrors that still haunt my dreams. But the cost, it's too high." She gestured to the quilt. "This isn't just a tool, Eliza. It's a responsibility, one that I'm passing to you, just as my grandmother passed it to me." Eliza's scientific mind warred with her emotions. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "Protect it," her grandmother said firmly. "Study it, understand it, but never, ever use it to change the past. The future, well, that's a different story. But that's for you to discover on your own." She pulled Eliza into a tight embrace. "I've missed you so much, my dear. But I can't stay. My time here is limited." As she pulled away, Eliza saw her grandmother's form beginning to fade. "Wait," she cried. "I have so many more questions." Her grandmother smiled, already half transparent. "You'll find the answers, Eliza. Trust in yourself and in the quilt." It will guide you when you need it most. And with that, she was gone, leaving Eliza alone in the lab with the gently glowing quilt. For a long moment, Eliza stood motionless, her mind struggling to process everything that had just happened. Then, with a deep breath, she turned back to the quilt. She understood now that this was more than just a scientific discovery. It was a legacy, a responsibility passed down through generations of her family. And now, it was hers to bear. With careful hands, she began to fold the quilt, her mind already racing with plans. She would continue her research, but with caution and respect for the power she now held. The quilt's secrets would be protected, shared only with those who could be trusted to understand its true significance. As she placed the folded quilt back in her bag, Eliza felt a sense of purpose settle over her. Her grandmother had been right. The future was hers to discover. And with the quantum quilt as her guide, she knew that future would be more extraordinary than she had ever imagined. In the years that followed, Eliza's work with the quantum quilt led to breakthroughs in physics that reshaped humanity's understanding of the universe. She never used it to travel through time herself, honoring her grandmother's warning. Instead, she focused on unraveling its mysteries, using the knowledge gained to advance science in ways that benefited all of humanity. The quilt became a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few. Eliza established a foundation dedicated to its study and protection, ensuring that its power would never fall into the wrong hands. As she grew older, Eliza began to search for the next guardian of the quilt. She watched her students and colleagues carefully, looking for someone with the right combination of brilliance, curiosity, and most importantly, wisdom. And on quiet nights, when the lab was empty and the world was still, Eliza would sometimes unfold the quilt and run her fingers over its intricate patterns. In those moments, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice, whispering secrets of time and space that were yet to be discovered. The quantum quilt, a patchwork of past, present, and future, continued to shape the course of human history from the shadows. And Eliza Weaver, once a skeptic who believed only in what she could prove, had become the keeper of one of the universe's greatest mysteries, a responsibility she bore with pride, wonder, and a deep respect for the interconnected nature of all things. As she looked to the future, Eliza knew that the greatest adventures and discoveries were yet to come. The quantum quilt had opened her eyes to a universe more vast and intricate than she had ever imagined. And though she would never use it to step through time herself, she knew that in a way, she was already a time traveler, carrying the knowledge of the past into the future, weaving her own thread into the grand tapestry of existence. The story of the quantum quilt was far from over. In fact, Eliza realized with a smile, it had only just begun.